At 9:47 a.m. on October 27, 1944, Captain James Fletcher crouched in his P-51 Mustang at 22,000 feet over Schweinfurt, Germany, watching a Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter diving toward the B-17 formation below him. The temperature at altitude was minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice crystals formed on his canopy. His oxygen mask smelled like rubber and cold metal. The Packard Merlin engine behind him roared at 3,000 RPM. Fletcher's airspeed indicator read 350 miles per hour. Full throttle. War emergency power. Everything his P-51 could give. The Me-262 was pulling away from him. Fletcher watched the gap widen. 400 yards, 500, 600. The jet accelerated like nothing he'd ever seen. 460 miles per hour, 480, 500. The swept wing silhouette grew smaller against the winter sky. Fletcher's right hand gripped the throttle so hard his knuckles turned white inside his leather glove. But the throttle was already forward as far as it would go. There was nothing more his aircraft could do. The Me-262 reached the bomber formation at 9:48. Fletcher watched the jet fire 24 R-4M rockets in a rippling salvo. The rockets streaked toward the lead B-17 squadron. Each rocket carried 500 grams of high explosive. 4 rockets hit the No. 3 bomber in the lead element. The B-17 exploded. Pieces of aluminum and human beings scattered across 3,000 feet of German sky. 10 men dead in 3 seconds. The Me-262 pilot pushed his throttles forward and climbed away before any American fighter could close range. The jet disappeared into the sun at 30,000 feet. Fletcher had flown 63 combat missions. He'd shot down 12 German fighters, Bf-109s and Fw-190s. Conventional aircraft he could catch, could fight, could kill. But the Me-262 was different. The Me-262 made his P-51 Mustang feel obsolete, made Fletcher feel helpless, made him watch good men die while he chased uselessly behind. By October 1944, the Messerschmitt Me-262 Schwalbe represented an existential threat to American bomber operations over Germany. The jet fighter's maximum speed was 540 miles per hour at 19,000 feet. The P-51 Mustang's maximum speed was 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. 100 mile per hour difference. The Me-262 climbed at 3,900 feet per minute. The P-51 climbed at 3,200 feet per minute. 700 feet per minute difference. In every measurable category except range, the German jet was superior. American fighter doctrine said, avoid engagement with jets. Protect bombers through formation flying. Run if possible. But running meant abandoning bomber crews to jet attacks. Running meant watching B-17s explode while American fighters fled. Running meant going home alive while bomber crews died. The math was brutal and getting worse. 8th Air Force fighter pilots had attempted standard intercept tactics against Me-262s for 3 months. 0 confirmed kills. 18 P-51 Mustangs lost trying. The Germans flew their jets in predictable patterns. Attack from altitude advantage. Dive from 28,000 feet to 20,000 feet. Fire R-4M rocket salvos into bomber formations. Climb away before American escorts could engage. The Me-262 pilots never fought below 15,000 feet. Never slowed down below 400 miles per hour. Never committed to sustained turning combat. They exploited speed and altitude exclusively. And it worked. Between October and December 1944, Me-262s destroyed 97 American heavy bombers. Each B-17 Flying Fortress carried a crew of 10 men. 970 American airmen killed or captured because American fighters had no answer for German jets. Captain James Fletcher was 26 years old. Born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. Medium height, 5 feet 10 inches. Farm-strong hands from 13 years working equipment his father couldn't afford to replace. Fletcher's eyes were gray and constantly calculating. Distances, speeds, angles. He'd learned mathematics through necessity. A tractor that wouldn't start meant crops that wouldn't get planted. Crops that didn't get planted meant family didn't eat. So young Fletcher learned engines, learned how power and momentum and mechanical advantage worked together. Fletcher joined the Army Air Forces in January 1942, 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor. Trained at Thunderbird Field in Arizona. Graduated flight school, April 1943. Assigned to the 357th Fighter Group, 363rd Fighter Squadron. Arrived in England, November 1943. Started flying combat missions December 15th. By October 1944, Fletcher had accumulated 63 combat missions. 12 confirmed kills against Bf-109 Messerschmitts and F-190 Focke-Wulfs. Distinguished Flying Cross. 3 air medals. Known throughout the squadron for bringing damaged aircraft home. Known for precise shooting. Known for thinking about problems other pilots accepted as unsolvable. Fletcher's mechanical aptitude came from the Depression. His father owned 3 tractors, 2 combines, 1 thresher. All of them old. All of them temperamental. Replacement parts cost money the Fletcher family didn't have during the 1930s. So when equipment broke, young Fletcher fixed it. He improvised solutions using wire and welding and whatever materials he could scavenge. He learned that every machine had an optimal operating range. Push a tractor engine too hard at low RPM and it stalled. Run it too long at high RPM and it overheated. Understanding those limitations meant knowing how to exploit them. Fletcher applied the same thinking to combat. He watched how German fighters attacked, studied their patterns, identified their habits. Bf-109 pilots loved diving attacks from the sun. F-190 pilots preferred slashing attacks through bomber formations. Fletcher learned to predict their behavior, learned to position himself where German pilots would commit. His 12 kills came from understanding German psychology as much as German aircraft. But the Me-262 was different. The jet pilots didn't need tactics. They had speed. Speed solved every problem. American fighter tries to intercept, accelerate away. American fighter tries to pursue, climb away. American fighter waits in ambush, attack from altitude the Americans can't reach quickly enough. Fletcher started studying the Me-262 problem in early October. He watched jets attack bomber formations 5 times. October 8th, October 12th, October 16th, October 21st, October 24th. Every attack followed the same pattern. Jets approached from high altitude, dove on bombers, fired rockets, climbed away. American fighters never got close enough for effective gunfire. But Fletcher noticed something. The Me-262 pilots never fought below 15,000 feet, never engaged in slow-speed combat. They attacked at high speed, or they didn't attack at all. Fletcher understood why. Jet engines needed high RPM for thrust generation. At low speeds, jets became sluggish, vulnerable, less maneuverable than propeller-driven fighters. The question was how to force jets into low-speed combat when jets could simply accelerate away from any threat. Fletcher lost his first wingman to an Me-262 on October 8, 1944. Lieutenant Robert Chen, 24 years old, Sacramento, California. Chen had flown with Fletcher for 6 months. They'd talked about California. Chen wanted to study engineering at Berkeley after the war. wanted to design aircraft, wanted to make fighters faster than anything the Germans had. At 10:15 a.m. on October 8th, Chen attempted a head-on pass against an Me-262 attacking a B-17 formation near Kassel. Head-on passes worked against Bf-109s because closure rates gave both pilots only 1 second of firing opportunity. Chen was excellent at deflection shooting, but the Me-262 approached at 520 miles per hour. Chen's P-51 flew at 410. Combined closure rate, 930 miles per hour. Chen fired a 3-second burst. Every round missed. The speeds were too high. The deflection angle impossible to calculate. The Me-262 pilot executed a barrel roll. Got behind Chen. Fired a 2-second burst from 4 30mm Mk-108 cannons. Chen's P-51 disintegrated. Fletcher watched pieces of aircraft and pieces of Chen fall 4 miles to German countryside below. No parachute. Instant death. Fletcher filed a combat report that evening. Recommended against head-on passes at Me-262s. Closure rates too high for effective gunnery. His recommendation was ignored. 3 more pilots tried head-on passes in the following week. 2 died. 1 survived with aircraft damage so severe he barely made it back to England. October 16th, Captain William Morrison led a 4-ship flight on an intercept mission. Intelligence reported Me-262s operating near Frankfurt. Morrison positioned his flight perfectly. Altitude advantage, sun behind them, classic diving attack from 7 o'clock high. Morrison was experienced. 28 combat missions, 7 confirmed kills. He knew how to set up an attack. Morrison's flight dove on an Me-262 at 9:32 a.m. Perfect geometry, perfect positioning. The German jet pilot saw them immediately, pushed his throttles forward. The Me-262 accelerated from 400 miles per hour to 520 miles per hour in 8 seconds. Morrison's P-51s couldn't match that acceleration. The jets pulled away. Gone. Then the Me-262 pilot did something Morrison didn't expect. Circled back. Climbed to 30,000 feet. Dove on Morrison's flight from their 6 o'clock. Shot down 2 P-51s before the Americans could react. Morrison survived. Half his flight didn't. Fletcher studied Morrison's combat report. The pattern was clear. Me-262s controlled every engagement. They chose when to fight, chose when to run. American fighters reacted. Reaction meant losing. October 24th, Major Frank Hayes tried a new tactic. Positioned 6 P-51s in a vertical stack from 15,000 to 25,000 feet. Theory: intercept Me-262s at multiple altitudes simultaneously. The jet couldn't avoid all 6 fighters, except the Me-262 pilot saw the trap. Climbed to 30,000 feet, attacked from above the entire American formation, destroyed 1 B-17, damaged 3 more, climbed to 32,000 feet. American fighters couldn't reach that altitude quickly enough. Hayes's tactic failed completely. That evening, Fletcher sat alone in his quarters at RAF Leiston. He pulled out his aircraft recognition manual, studied the Me-262 specifications. Messerschmitt Me-262 Schwalbe, powered by 2 Junkers, Jumo 004B turbojet engines. Each engine produced 890 kilograms of thrust, maximum speed 540 miles per hour, service ceiling 11,500 meters. Fletcher read the engine specifications 3 times. Turbojet engines, different from radial or inline piston engines. Jets worked by compressing air, mixing it with fuel, igniting the mixture, and expelling it at high velocity through a turbine. Continuous combustion, high RPM, maximum efficiency at high speeds. But what about low speeds? Fletcher remembered his father's John Deere Model D tractor. The tractor was powerful at high speed, high RPM, pulled heavy equipment, worked all day. But at low RPM, the tractor struggled, lost power, nearly stalled under load. Every engine had an optimal operating range. What was the Me-262's optimal range? High speed, high altitude. What happened to Me-262 performance at low speeds? Below 300 miles per hour? Below 250? Fletcher didn't know, but he suspected the jet became vulnerable, sluggish, less maneuverable. The problem was forcing jets into that vulnerability range. Jets simply accelerated away when threatened. Unless the American fighter appeared non-threatening, unless the P-51 looked crippled, unless Fletcher removed his own engine from the equation. The idea was insane. Cutting your engine in combat meant potentially unrecoverable stall. Meant trusting a cold start restart at high altitude. Meant gambling your life that a German pilot's arrogance would exceed his caution. Fletcher thought about Chen. Thought about the 2 pilots Morrison lost. Thought about 97 B-17s destroyed between October and December. 970 airmen dead. 1 pilot's life versus 970 others. The mathematics favored attempting something insane. Fletcher closed the aircraft manual. Tomorrow he'd talk to his crew chief, ask about high-altitude engine restart procedures, learn if his idea was merely suicidal or completely impossible. Outside his window, other P-51s landed from evening patrol. Merlin engines echoed across the airfield. Fletcher listened to those engines and wondered how long the sound of silence would last before one of them refused to restart. At 600 hours on October 25, 1944, Fletcher found Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez in the maintenance hangar at RAF Leaston. Rodriguez was 41 years old, El Paso, Texas. He'd been maintaining aircraft since 1936. Started with biplanes, now worked on the most advanced fighter in the American inventory. Rodriguez knew the Packard Merlin Vive 1657 engine better than the engineers who designed it. Rodriguez was elbow deep in an engine cowling when Fletcher approached. The sergeant didn't look up, just kept working on cylinder head bolts with a torque wrench. Fletcher waited. Rodriguez finished torquing the bolt to specification, wiped his hands on a rag black with oil and grease, then looked at Fletcher. "Morning, Captain. Your bird's ready for today's mission. Pre-flight done. All systems green." "Thanks, Tony. I need to ask you something technical." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed slightly. 20 months maintaining Fletcher's P-51D Ohio Ranger meant Rodriguez knew when Fletcher was thinking about something dangerous. "How technical?" "Engine restart procedures at high altitude." Rodriguez set down his torque wrench, gave Fletcher his full attention. "How high we talking?" 20,000 feet, maybe higher. "You planning on cutting your engine in combat, Captain?" Fletcher didn't answer directly. "Just need to understand the procedure. Theoretical question." Rodriguez stared at Fletcher for 5 seconds, then shook his head. "Sir, with respect, that's the worst theoretical question I've heard in 2 years. You cut that Merlin at 20,000 feet. You got maybe 60 seconds of glide before you're in unrecoverable stall. And that's if you maintain proper airspeed and attitude. What about restart reliability?" Rodriguez pulled a pack of cigarettes from his coverall pocket. Lit one. Took a long drag. "At 20,000 feet? Temperature's around -40, air's thin. Oxygen partial pressure maybe 30% of sea level. Battery power reduced in extreme cold. I'd say your restart success rate is maybe 70%. Best case. 70%. That's if everything goes perfect. Mixture rich, throttle position exact, magnetos hot, starter engaging properly, prop windmilling at correct speed for compression. Miss any one of those variables and you got a dead engine and a long fall. Walk me through the procedure. Rodriguez took another drag, exhaled smoke into the cold morning air. Captain, you really planning on doing this? Just need to know if it's possible. Possible and survivable are two different things. Rodriguez dropped his cigarette, ground it out with his boot. But okay, here's the sequence. First, before you cut the engine, set mixture to full rich. That's critical. Engine needs rich mixture for cold restart. Then, when you're ready to cut, pull mixture control to idle cutoff. Engine dies. Prop windmills from airflow. Fletcher listened carefully, memorized every word. When you want to restart, Rodriguez continued, mixture back to full rich. Throttle forward 1 inch, just 1 inch. More than that, and you'll flood the engine. Both magnetos hot. Then hit the starter. If the engine's still warm, it should catch in 3 to 5 seconds. If it's cold, you'll need primer. 3 to 5 strokes, maybe more. And if it doesn't catch, try again. You probably got time for 3 attempts before altitude gets too low. After that, Rodriguez shrugged. You bail out or ride it down. What factors affect restart success? Temperature, altitude, how long the engine's been dead, prop windmill speed, battery voltage, luck. Rodriguez looked directly at Fletcher. Captain, I've been wrenching on aircraft since you were in high school. I've seen pilots try stupid things. This might be the stupidest. Whatever you're planning, please reconsider. Fletcher nodded. Thanks for the information, Tony. Sir, one more thing. You do this and it goes wrong. Don't expect me to lie at the accident investigation. I'll tell them exactly what I told you this morning. Understood. Fletcher walked away. Rodriguez watched him go, then returned to his torque wrench and cylinder head bolts. But his hands moved automatically now. His mind was calculating how to explain to a widow why her husband cut his engine at 20,000 feet. Fletcher spent the morning studying weather reports. He needed solo flight time, needed empty airspace away from witnesses, needed to test his theory before attempting it in combat. At 1400 hours, he volunteered for weather reconnaissance patrol over the North Sea. Solo mission, no formation. Perfect. Fletcher took off from RAF, Leaston at 1415, climbed to 22,000 feet, headed east over the North Sea. The water below was gray and cold, white caps visible on the surface. No ships, no aircraft, just Fletcher, an empty sky, and the idea that might kill him. At 22,000 feet, Fletcher leveled off, trimmed the aircraft for hands-off flight, checked his instruments, airspeed 350 miles per hour, engine temperature normal, oil pressure 55 pounds per square inch, manifold pressure 36 inches, everything perfect. Fletcher's right hand moved to the mixture control. Red knob on the lower left of the instrument panel. He wrapped his fingers around it. Cold sweat formed inside his leather gloves, despite the minus 42-degree temperature. He thought about Rodriguez's warning. 70% success rate, 30% chance of death. He thought about Chen falling 4 miles with no parachute. Thought about Morrison's 2 wingmen shot down because American fighters couldn't catch jets. Thought about 97 B-17s destroyed, 970 men dead. Fletcher pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff. The Packard Merlin engine coughed once, sputtered, died. Sudden silence except for wind noise over the canopy. The propeller continued spinning from airflow, windmilling, but producing no thrust. Fletcher's P-51 Ohio Ranger transformed from fighter aircraft to 14,000-pound glider with a 40-foot wingspan. Fletcher felt the aircraft's nose drop slightly. Normal. Without engine thrust, the aircraft settled into its natural glide angle, approximately 10 degrees nose down. He adjusted the trim. The P-51 stabilized. Glide ratio, approximately 10-1. For every 1,000 feet of altitude, Fletcher could glide approximately 2 miles horizontally. At 22,000 feet, he had roughly 44 miles of gliding range. But he didn't need 44 miles. He needed 30 seconds and a working engine. Fletcher watched the altimeter. 22,000 feet, 21,800, 21,600. Descent rate approximately 800 feet per minute. The aircraft felt different without engine noise. Quieter, more responsive to control inputs. The absence of engine torque changed the flight characteristics subtly. 15 seconds of glide. Time to restart. Fletcher's left hand moved through the sequence Rodriguez taught him. Mixture controlled a full rich, right hand to throttle. Forward 1 inch. Eyes to magneto switches, both hot. Right thumb to starter button. He pressed the starter. The propeller continued windmilling. The engine turned over. Compression evident in the cylinder movement. But no ignition, no combustion. The Merlin remained dead. Altitude 21,400 feet. Fletcher hit the starter again. Same result. Propeller turning, engine rotating. No ignition, altitude 21,200 feet. Fletcher's heart rate accelerated. 2 attempts failed. This was the scenario Rodriguez warned about. The scenario with a 30% probability. Fletcher was experiencing the wrong side of those odds. 3rd attempt. Fletcher added primer. 3 strokes of the primer pump. Additional fuel directly into the intake manifold. He hit the starter button. The engine coughed. Caught for half a second. Died. Altitude 21,000 feet. Fletcher's throat felt tight inside his oxygen mask. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from the realization that he might have just killed himself testing a theory in empty sky over the North Sea. 4th attempt. 5 strokes of primer. Maybe too much. Risk of flooding the engine. But Fletcher was out of conservative options. Starter button. The Merlin coughed. Caught. Coughed again. Caught. Held. The engine roared to life. 12 cylinders firing in sequence. 1,400 horsepower returning. The propeller bit air. Thrust restored. Fletcher shoved the throttle forward to war emergency power. The Merlin screamed. Manifold pressure climbed to 67 inches. The P-51's nose lifted. Fletcher exhaled. He'd been holding his breath for 20 seconds without realizing it. The restart had taken 4 attempts in approximately 25 seconds. Altitude lost, 1,000 feet. Current altitude, 20,900 feet. The test was successful, but barely. 4 attempts meant 3 failures. That was worse than Rodriguez's 30% failure rate prediction. Fletcher needed better reliability. Needed to understand what variables affected restart success. He climbed back to 24,000 feet. Decided to test again at higher altitude. Higher altitude meant colder temperature, less oxygen, worse conditions. If the technique failed at 24,000 feet, Fletcher needed to know before attempting it in combat. At 24,000 feet, Fletcher repeated the procedure. Mixture to idle cutoff. Engine died. Glided for 20 seconds. Started the restart sequence. First attempt failed. Second attempt failed. Third attempt caught. Engine restarted. Success, but still requiring multiple attempts. Fletcher climbed to 22,000 feet. Tested again. This time the engine restarted on the second attempt. Better, but still not reliable enough. He tested 5 more times over the next 40 minutes, varying altitudes between 19,000 and 24,000 feet. Varying glide times between 15 and 30 seconds, collecting data, understanding the pattern. Results: restarts at 19,000 to 23,000 feet succeeded eventually. Usually required 2 to 3 attempts. Restarts above 23,000 feet became significantly less reliable. Required 4 or more attempts, sometimes failed completely, forcing Fletcher to dive to lower altitude before restart succeeded. Fletcher noted one critical variable: propeller windmill speed. If the propeller slowed below certain RPM, restart became nearly impossible. Maintaining airspeed between 300 and 350 miles per hour kept propeller windmilling at optimal speed for compression and restart. By 15:30 hours, Fletcher had tested the engine cut procedure 8 times. 8 successes, 0 failures resulting in unrecoverable situations. But several close calls, several moments when he thought the engine wouldn't restart. Several moments when he calculated how many seconds remained before bailout became mandatory. Fletcher returned to RAF Leiston at 15:55 hours. Landed, taxied to his revetment. Rodriguez was waiting. The crew chief walked around the aircraft slowly, ran his hand along the engine cowling, felt the temperature, opened the cowling, inspected the engine carefully, then looked at Fletcher. "How many times did you cut it?" Fletcher didn't lie. 8. And restarted successfully every time? Eventually. Eventually meaning what? First try, third try, 10th try? Averaged about 2 to 3 attempts per restart. One required 4 attempts. Rodriguez closed the cowling, latched it, wiped his hands on his rag. "Captain, you understand that 4 attempts means you're below 15,000 feet before you get power back. That's not tactical advantage anymore. That's emergency situation." "I know. But it worked. Every time it eventually worked." "Eventually? That's a hell of a word to bet your life on." Fletcher climbed out of the cockpit. His legs felt weak, adrenaline wearing off. He realized he'd been operating on pure focus for 90 minutes. Now his body was reminding him he'd gambled with death 8 times in one afternoon. "Tony, I need you to do something." "What?" "Don't report this. Don't tell anyone I was testing engine restarts." Rodriguez lit another cigarette. "You're asking me to keep quiet about a pilot deliberately risking his aircraft and his life on unauthorized experiments." "Yes. And if you do this in combat and it goes wrong, then I'm dead, and you tell the truth. Tell them I did it against your advice, against regulations. Completely my decision." Rodriguez smoked in silence for 30 seconds, then nodded once. "You better come back alive, Captain, because I don't want to write that report." Fletcher spent the evening in his quarters, calculating, planning. The engine cut technique worked, barely. Reliability was marginal. Success depended on proper altitude, proper airspeed, proper procedure. Miss any variable and the technique failed. But the technique gave Fletcher something he didn't have before. A way to appear vulnerable. A way to bait Me-262 pilots into mistakes. A way to force jets into slow-speed knife fights, where P-51s held advantage. The mathematics still favored attempting it. One pilot's 30% death risk versus 970 bomber crew lives saved if the technique worked in combat. Fletcher pulled out his mission schedule. Tomorrow, October 27th, escort mission to Schweinfurt. Expected German resistance. Heavy. Intelligence reported 3 Me-262s based at Akmar airfield. High probability of jet attacks on bomber formations. Tomorrow, Fletcher would test his theory against a real Me-262. Tomorrow, he'd discover whether his engine-cut glide technique was tactical innovation or elaborate suicide. Tomorrow, he'd either validate months of dead American pilots or become another statistic. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. Outside, evening patrol aircraft landed. Merlin engines echoed across the base. Fletcher listened to those engines and wondered which sound was worse. The roar of an engine at full power or the silence of an engine that wouldn't restart at 20,000 feet while a German jet pilot lined up guns for the kill. Sleep came slowly. When it came, Fletcher dreamed of falling through cold sky with a dead engine and a propeller that windmilled uselessly while the ground grew larger below him. He woke at 0400 hours, 2 hours before mission briefing. Couldn't fall back asleep. Fletcher sat up, pulled on his boots, walked to the operations building, empty except for one clerk updating mission boards. Fletcher studied the board for tomorrow's mission. 96 B-17s, 16 P-51 escorts. Target, ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. Expected losses, moderate to heavy. Below the mission summary, someone had written in chalk, "Watch for jets." Fletcher stared at those 3 words. Watch for jets. As if watching helped. As if seeing the Me-262 coming made any difference when American fighters couldn't catch them anyway. Fletcher picked up the chalk, erased "Watch for jets," wrote instead, "Kill the jets." The clerk looked up. "Sir, you can't change the mission board." "I didn't change it. I clarified it." Fletcher walked back to his quarters. 3 hours until briefing. 3 hours until he discovered whether Rodriguez's 70% success rate held true when someone was shooting at him. 3 hours until the dead man's drop became either tactical doctrine or cautionary tale. He spent those 3 hours checking his equipment. Flight suit, gloves, boots, parachute, survival kit, sidearm. Everything perfect, everything ready, everything except the certainty that his engine would restart when he needed it most. At 0630, Fletcher walked to the briefing room with 63 combat missions behind him and the most dangerous mission of his life ahead of him. He was about to violate direct orders, risk court-martial, and bet his life on a technique that worked 70% of the time in testing. The other 30% meant falling 4 miles to German countryside with a dead engine and the knowledge that innovation sometimes just means dying in a new way. The mission briefing began at 0630 hours. Major Frank Hayes stood at the front of the room, beside a large map of Germany. 64 pilots filled the wooden chairs. The air smelled like coffee and cigarette smoke and nervous sweat. Fletcher sat in the 3rd row. His wingman, Lieutenant Danny O'Brien, sat beside him. Hayes tapped the map with a wooden pointer. "Gentlemen, today's target is Schweinfurt. Ball-bearing factories. We're escorting 96 B-17s from the 381st and 303rd Bombardment Groups. Expected time over target, 1000 hours. Expected German resistance, heavy. Intelligence reports 50-plus Bf-109s and F-190s based at airfields within intercept range." Hayes moved the pointer to a small notation on the map. Additionally, 3 Me-262 jets are confirmed at Akhmir. High probability they'll attempt intercept of the bomber stream. The room went quiet. Every pilot knew what Me-262s meant. Someone in the back row muttered something Fletcher couldn't hear. Hayes ignored it. "Standard doctrine applies. Stay with the bombers. Do not pursue jets. I repeat, do not engage Me-262s. Your job is bomber protection, not glory hunting. The jets are faster than you. They will kill you if you try to fight them. Let them go." Fletcher said nothing, kept his face neutral, knew he was about to violate those orders completely. Hayes continued the briefing for 20 minutes. Weather, altitudes, radio frequencies, emergency procedures, Rendezvous points. Everything routine except the 3 Me-262s that everyone was thinking about and nobody wanted to discuss. Briefing ended at 0700. Pilots filed out toward the flight line. O'Brien walked beside Fletcher. "You okay, Captain? You're quiet this morning." "Just thinking." "About the jets?" "Among other things." O'Brien was 23 years old. Boston. Flew 31 combat missions, 5 confirmed kills. Good pilot. Followed orders. Trusted Fletcher completely. Fletcher felt guilty about what he was planning. Guilty that he couldn't tell O'Brien the truth. Couldn't risk O'Brien trying to stop him or trying to help and getting killed. "Danny, if things get complicated up there today, you stay with the formation, understand?" "What kind of complicated?" "Just stay with the bombers, no matter what." O'Brien looked at Fletcher carefully. "Captain, you planning something?" "Just fly your mission. Protect the bombers. That's the job." They reached the flight line at 0720. Fletcher's P-51D Ohio Ranger waited in its revetment. Rodriguez had already completed the pre-flight inspection. The aircraft looked perfect. Aluminum skin clean, canopy polished, 450 caliber machine guns loaded in each wing, 8 guns total, 1,850 rounds of ammunition. Fletcher did his own walk-around inspection. Checked control surfaces, checked tires, checked engine cowling, everything perfect. Rodriguez appeared beside him. "All systems green, Captain. Engine runs smooth. Oil pressure good. She's ready." Fletcher nodded. "Thanks, Tony." Rodriguez lowered his voice. "You're going to do it today, aren't you?" The engine. Cut. Fletcher didn't confirm or deny. "If I don't come back, tell my family I was doing my job." "Sir, that's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got." Fletcher climbed into the cockpit at 0735. Strapped in, 5-point harness, parachute connected. Radio leads plugged in, oxygen mask connected. He went through the startup checklist. Battery on, fuel pump on, mixture rich, throttle 1 inch forward. Magnetos both. Mesh starter. The Packard Merlin engine coughed twice and roared to life. 12 cylinders firing perfectly. 1,400 horsepower. The propeller spun into a blur. Fletcher let the engine warm up for 3 minutes. Watched the oil temperature climb to operating range. Checked all instruments. Everything normal. At 0742, Fletcher taxied to the runway. 16 P-51s took off in 4-ship flights. Fletcher flew number 3 position in Hayes's flight. O'Brien flew number 4. They took off at 30-second intervals. Fletcher's takeoff was at 0744. He advanced the throttle to full power. The P-51 accelerated down the runway. 80 miles per hour, 100, 120. At 135 miles per hour, Fletcher pulled back on the stick. The P-51 lifted off. Gear up, flaps up, climb power. The formation assembled over East Anglia at 5,000 feet, 16 P-51s in loose formation. They climbed to 25,000 feet and headed east toward Germany. The North Sea appeared below them. Gray water, white caps. Fletcher could see the English coastline falling behind. At 0814, they crossed into German airspace over Belgium. The bomber stream was visible 12 miles ahead. 96 B-17s in tight formations. Each bomber was a fortress of aluminum and guns, and 10 men who trusted American fighters to keep them alive. Fletcher's oxygen mask felt tight against his face. The temperature at altitude was minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit. His hands inside leather gloves felt cold despite the heated cockpit. He checked his fuel. Internal tanks full. 2 external drop tanks full. Enough fuel for 4 hours of flight time. The formation continued east toward Schweinfurt. Fletcher flew in position. wings level, eyes scanning constantly, looking for German fighters, looking for jets. At 0947 hours, Hayes' voice crackled over the radio. "Bogies, 11 o'clock high, 28,000 feet." Fletcher looked up and left. 3 contacts. High and fast. Distinctive swept-wing silhouette even at 6 miles distance. Me-262s. "All flights maintain position," Hayes ordered. "Stay with the bombers. Do not pursue." Fletcher watched the 3 jets. They flew in loose trail formation. Lead aircraft had a yellow nose marking. Jagdverband 44 insignia. Elite German jet unit. The 2 wingmen flew 500 feet behind and offset right. The jets had altitude advantage, 6,000 feet above the American fighters. They had speed advantage, already accelerating into their attack dive. They had firepower advantage. Each Me-262 carried 4 30mm cannons and 24 R4M rockets. And they were diving toward the bomber formation where 360 American airmen flew in aluminum coffins. Fletcher's decision point arrived. Follow orders. Stay with the formation, watch bombers die, or break formation. Violate direct orders. Attempt an experimental technique that might kill him. 3 seconds to decide. Fletcher thought about Chen falling 4 miles with no parachute. Thought about Morrison's wingmen shot down. Thought about 97 B-17s destroyed and 970 men dead because American fighters had no answer for jets. 3 seconds between following orders and following conscience. Fletcher broke formation. "Lead, this is 3 breaking to engage." Hayes' response was immediate and furious. "-3, maintain position." Fletcher was already diving. 3 engaged, request permission to pursue. 3, you are ordered to... Fletcher switched his radio to guard emergency frequency. Couldn't hear Hayes' orders if the radio was on different channel. Court-martial offense number 2. Fletcher didn't care anymore. He was committed. The intercept geometry was simple mathematics. Me-262s diving from 28,000 feet to 20,000 feet. Fletcher at 25,000 feet. 3 miles lateral offset. He needed to position between the jets and bombers. Needed the jets to see him as threat first, then as non-threat. Fletcher pushed the throttle to war emergency power. 67 inches of manifold pressure. 3,000 RPM. The Merlin engine screamed. Manifold pressure gauge climbed into the red zone. Emergency power meant 5 minutes maximum before engine damage. Fletcher didn't need 5 minutes. He needed 90 seconds. The P-51 accelerated in the dive. 360 miles per hour, 380, 400, 420. The aircraft shook slightly. Airframe stress from high-speed dive. Fletcher ignored it, focused on the intercept point. He pulled out of the dive at 22,000 feet, 1,000 yards in front of the lead Me-262, between the jets and the bombers. The German pilot saw him immediately, had to see him. Fletcher's P-51 was directly in the attack path. Fletcher wings leveled, appeared to be executing standard escort intercept. The German pilot evaluated the threat. Single P-51, trying to block 3 jets. Predictable American tactic. The German pilot had seen it before. Then Fletcher did something no P-51 pilot had ever done in combat against jets. His left hand moved to the mixture control. Red knob on the lower instrument panel. He pulled it to idle cutoff. The Packard Merlin engine coughed once. Died. Sudden silence except wind noise over the canopy. The propeller continued spinning from airflow, windmilling, but producing 0 thrust. Fletcher's P-51, Ohio Ranger, transformed from predator to prey, from threat to non-threat, from fighter to falling aluminum. Oil vapor trailed from the engine cowling, natural result of sudden shutdown. From the German pilot's perspective, it looked like smoke, looked like catastrophic engine failure, looked like an American fighter whose engine had quit at the worst possible moment. Fletcher pushed the nose down. 10-degree glide angle. Descent rate 1,200 feet per minute. Airspeed decreasing from 420 to 390 to 360. The P-51 appeared to be falling. Crippled. Dying. Pilot probably trying desperately to restart his engine. Perfect bait. Fletcher watched the lead Me-262 over his left shoulder. The German pilot had a choice. Continue attack on bombers, primary mission, or take an easy confirmation kill on a crippled American fighter. The American appeared helpless, non-threatening, falling out of the sky. German jet pilots were professionals, but they were also human. Arrogance was universal. The opportunity to watch an American burn was too tempting. The lead Me-262 broke off the bomber attack, turned toward Fletcher. The two wingmen continued toward the bombers, but the lead aircraft was committed now, committed to killing the crippled P-51. Fletcher maintained his glide. 22,000 feet, 21,800, 21,600. His left hand rested on the mixture control, ready to restart. His right hand flew the aircraft, maintaining proper airspeed, 340 miles per hour, optimal for propeller windmill speed and engine restart. The Me-262 closed from Fletcher's 6 o'clock high, 800 yards, 700, 600. The German pilot was taking his time, not worried, not threatened, just positioning for a perfect deflection shot, setting up to watch the American explode. 500 yards. Fletcher watched over his shoulder, watched the jet growing larger, watched the swept wings, watched the 4 30mm cannon ports in the nose. 450 yards. The German pilot lined up his gun sight. 4 Mk-108 cannons charged and ready, finger moving to the trigger. 2 more seconds until optimal firing range. 425 yards. Fletcher's altitude was 19,800 feet. Airspeed 320 miles per hour. The Me-262 was at 460 miles per hour. Closing at 140 miles per hour relative. 400 yards. Now. Fletcher's left hand snapped the mixture control to full rich. Right hand left the stick momentarily. Throttle forward 1 inch. Eyes to magneto switches, both hot. Right thumb hit the starter button. The propeller continued windmilling. The engine turned over, compression in the cylinders, but no ignition, no combustion. The Merlin stayed dead. Me-262 at 375 yards, still closing. Fletcher hit the starter again. Same result. Propeller turning, engine rotating, no ignition. This was the scenario he'd experienced in testing. The scenario where multiple attempts were required. The scenario with a 30% failure rate. Altitude 19,600 feet. The German pilot's finger touched the trigger. Fletcher added primer. 3 strokes, hit the starter button a 3rd time. The Merlin coughed. Caught for half a second. Died again. Me-262 at 350 yards. German pilot squeezing trigger. Fletcher hit the starter again. 4th attempt. The engine coughed. Caught. Coughed again. Caught. Held. 12 cylinders fired in sequence. 1,400 horsepower roared back to life. The propeller bit air. Thrust returned instantly. Fletcher shoved the throttle to war emergency power. The Merlin screamed. 67 inches manifold pressure, 3,000 RPM. the supposedly dead P-51 suddenly alive and aggressive. Fletcher pulled hard, right, maximum G-turn. The P-51 banked 90 degrees. The nose came around. Fletcher's vision grayed at the edges from G-forces. 7 Gs, 8 Gs, the maximum the airframe could handle. The Me-262 pilot's shock was visible even from 300 yards. His jet was positioned for an easy kill on a crippled target. Now that target was maneuvering hard. Now that target's engine was running. Now that target's guns were pointing at him. The German pilot reacted instantly. Professional training overrode shock. He pushed his throttles forward, full power. The two Junkers Jumo turbojets began spooling up. But turbojet acceleration wasn't instantaneous. The engines needed 8 to 12 seconds to reach maximum thrust. Fletcher's turn brought his nose toward the Me-262. The jet was at 420 miles per hour. Too slow for optimal maneuverability. The Me-262's turn radius at that speed was approximately 2,000 feet. Fletcher's P-51, at 390 miles per hour, turned inside 1,400 feet. Fletcher was inside the German's turn, already pulling lead, already tracking the jet with his gun sight. The Pipper settled on the Me-262's fuselage, range 350 yards in closing. 6 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 1,850 rounds loaded. Fletcher squeezed the trigger. 70 rounds fired in 2 seconds. Tracers arced toward the Me-262. Some rounds missed ahead. Fletcher adjusted his aim. Less lead. The jet was accelerating but not yet at full speed. Second burst. 80 rounds. Hits. Sparks flew off the Me-262's right engine nacelle. Titanium cowling deflecting some rounds, but armor-piercing incendiary ammunition punching through. The German pilot tried to brake left, tried to use the jet's speed advantage. But the engines hadn't reached full power yet. The turn was sluggish, predictable. Fletcher stayed with him. The P-51 glued to the Me-262's 6 o'clock. Range 300 yards, Fletcher could see the pilot's head in the cockpit. Could see him looking over his shoulder. Could see the moment the German pilot realized his mistake. Arrogance had put him here. Had made him chase a crippled American fighter instead of completing his primary mission. Now that arrogance was going to kill him. Fletcher fired a sustained burst. 200 rounds in 4 seconds. The concentration of fire was overwhelming. Rounds walked up the Me-262's fuselage. The cockpit canopy shattered. Glass fragments exploded outward. The right engine nacelle erupted in flame. Fuel fire, orange and black smoke. The left engine was still running, but the jet was uncontrollable. The Me-262 rolled inverted. The nose dropped. The aircraft entered an unrecoverable spin. Fletcher watched it fall. 19,000 feet, 18,000, 17,000. No parachute. The German pilot was either dead from the 50 caliber rounds that shattered his canopy, or unable to escape the spinning aircraft. At 11,000 feet, the Me-262 impacted German countryside. The explosion was visible even from 19,000 feet. Orange fireball. Black smoke column rising. The time was 0951 hours, October 27th, 1944. Captain James Fletcher had just scored the first American kill against a German Me-262 jet fighter, using a technique that violated every regulation in the 8th Air Force manual. Fletcher switched his radio back to squadron frequency. Hayes's voice came through immediately. 3, report your status. 3 operational. 1 bandit splashed. Silence for 3 seconds. Say again your last. 3. 1. Me-262 destroyed. Confirmed. Longer silence. Multiple pilots had witnessed the engagement. had watched Fletcher's engine quit, had watched the Me-262 pursue, had watched Fletcher's engine restart impossibly, had watched him kill the jet at knife fighting range. O'Brien's voice. "Jesus Christ, Fletcher, how did you—" Fletcher cut him off. "Later. We've got work to do." The two remaining Me-262s had seen their leader die. Both broke off their bomber attacks, climbed to 30,000 feet, refused further engagement. For the first time in the war, German jets were running from American fighters. Fletcher climbed back toward the bomber formation. His hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through his system. The engine restart had required 4 attempts. 4 attempts meant he'd been helpless for 15 seconds while a German pilot lined up guns. 15 seconds where one variable going wrong meant death. But it worked. The dead man's drop worked. Fletcher had forced an Me-262 into slow-speed combat where the jet's advantages disappeared and the P-51's maneuverability dominated. 1 kill. Proof of concept. Now Fletcher had to survive the landing and explain to Hayes why he'd violated direct orders and switched radio frequencies and risked his life on an unauthorized experimental tactic. Court-martial or medal. Fletcher would discover which, in approximately 3 hours, the bomber formation bomber reached Schweinfurt at 10:03 hours. 96 B-17s dropped their ordnance on ball-bearing factories below. Secondary explosions visible from 20,000 feet. The mission was successful. 0 bomber losses. The 2 remaining Me-262s never returned. Fletcher stayed with the formation on the return flight. German Bf-109s attempted intercept over Belgium, but P-51 escorts drove them off. Standard combat. Nothing Fletcher couldn't handle on autopilot while his mind replayed the engine restart sequence. 4 attempts, 15 seconds, 350 yards from a German jet with 4 30mm cannons pointed at him. He'd won the gamble, this time. Fletcher landed at RAF Leiston at 12:54 hours. Hayes was waiting on the tarmac beside Rodriguez. Fletcher taxied to his revetment, shut down the engine. The Merlin coughed twice and died. Normal shutdown. Nothing like the deliberate cutoff at 22,000 feet. Fletcher climbed out of the cockpit. His legs felt weak. Hayes walked toward him. The major's face was unreadable. "Captain Fletcher, intelligence debriefing, now." "Yes, sir." They walked to the operations building in silence. O'Brien and 2 other pilots followed, all witnesses to what Fletcher had done. Inside the briefing room, Captain Robert Mitchell waited. Intelligence officer, notebook open, pen ready. Hayes closed the door. "Sit down, Captain." Fletcher sat. Hayes remained standing. Mitchell sat across the table. "Explain exactly what you did up there," Mitchell said. Fletcher described the technique step by step. Cut engine at 22,000 feet. Glided to simulate engine failure. German pilot took bait. Closed to 400 yards. Restarted engine. Engaged jet at close range. Destroyed Me-262 before it could accelerate away. Mitchell wrote everything down. Hayes listened without interrupting. When Fletcher finished, the room was silent for 10 seconds. Hayes spoke first. "Captain Fletcher, you deliberately cut your engine in combat. You violated direct orders not to engage jets. You switched radio frequencies to avoid hearing commands. You executed unauthorized experimental tactics without approval from command. Do you understand these are court-martial offenses?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Fletcher met Hayes's eyes. 96 bombers came home today, sir. 960 men are alive tonight. Would have been fewer if that Me-262 reached them. Hayes stared at Fletcher. Long silence. Mitchell continued writing notes. "Captain Mitchell," Hayes said without breaking eye contact with Fletcher, Your assessment. Mitchell looked up from his notebook. From an intelligence perspective, Captain Fletcher just demonstrated the first successful tactic against Me-262s. His technique exploited the jet's weakness at low speeds and the pilot's psychological vulnerability. If the tactic can be replicated, it represents significant tactical advantage. And the risks? Hayes asked. Substantial. Engine restart reliability at altitude is approximately 70% under optimal conditions. Combat conditions reduce that further. Additionally, the tactic depends entirely on enemy pilot error. If the German pilot recognizes the deception, Captain Fletcher would be helpless for 30 seconds while his engine is dead. Hayes finally looked away from Fletcher, walked to the window, stared out at the flight line where P-51s were being refueled and rearmed. Captain Fletcher, Hayes said quietly, I should have you arrested. Fletcher said nothing. Hayes turned around. But you killed a jet. First American pilot to do it. And your technique, insane as it is, it worked. Hayes walked back to the table, placed both hands on the surface, leaned forward. I'm forwarding your after-action report to 8th Air Force Headquarters. Let them decide whether you're a hero or a criminal. Until they decide, you're grounded. No more unauthorized experiments. Understood? Understood, sir. Dismissed. Fletcher stood, walked toward the door. Hayes' voice stopped him. Fletcher, off the record. That was either the bravest thing I've seen or the stupidest. I haven't decided which. Sometimes they're the same thing, sir. Fletcher left the building. Rodriguez was waiting outside. The crew chief lit a cigarette, offered the pack to Fletcher. Fletcher took one. His hands shook slightly, lighting it. You did it, Rodriguez said. You actually cut the engine in combat. Yeah. And it worked. Barely. Took 4 attempts to restart. Rodriguez exhaled smoke. 4 attempts! Jesus Christ, Captain. That means you were dead in the water for what, 15 seconds? About that. With a German jet closing on you. Yeah. Rodriguez shook his head. You got lucky. Real lucky. I know. They smoked in silence. Other pilots walked past. Some congratulated Fletcher. Some looked at him like he was insane. Fletcher suspected both groups were right. News spread through the 8th Air Force within 24 hours. American pilot downed Me-262 using engine-cut glide tactic. By October 29th, pilots from other fighter groups were calling RAF Leiston asking questions. How did Fletcher restart the engine? What's the risk factor? Does the technique work reliably? Fletcher was still grounded. Couldn't answer directly. But O'Brien and Rodriguez shared details with pilots who asked. The technique spread through unofficial channels. Word of mouth, hangar conversations, pilots teaching other pilots. October 30th. Lieutenant Carl Jensen, 361st Fighter Group, attempted Fletcher's technique. Cut engine at 21,000 feet. Me-262 took bait. Close to 500 yards. Jensen restarted engine on first attempt. Engaged jet. Damaged it severely with concentrated .50 caliber fire. The Me-262 escaped, but never returned to base. Credited as probable kill. November 2nd. Captain Thomas Bailey, 352nd Fighter Group, used the dead man's drop. Destroyed one Me-262. Damaged another. Both confirmed by multiple witnesses. 3 American pilots now using unauthorized tactic, all 3 successful against jets. The pattern was impossible for headquarters to ignore. November 5th, 8th Air Force Headquarters issued memorandum. Subject: Tactical innovation against jet aircraft. Fletcher's technique officially designated Emergency Engine Out Intercept Procedure. Not formally approved, but not prohibited. Pilots who attempted it did so at own risk. Classic military bureaucracy, neither endorsing nor forbidding, giving commanders plausible deniability, giving pilots permission without authorization. Fletcher read the memorandum and understood what it meant. He wasn't getting court-martialed. He was getting imitators. November 7th through 15th, Fletcher worked with Mitchell and test pilots at Bovingdon. Systematic testing of engine cut technique, varying altitudes, varying temperatures, varying airspeeds. Results documented carefully. Optimal altitude for restart, 19,000 to 23,000 feet. Below 19,000, insufficient altitude for recovery if restart failed. Above 23,000, restart reliability dropped to 45%. Optimal airspeed for restart, 300 to 350 miles per hour. Below 300, insufficient propeller windmilling speed. Above 350, aerodynamic loads complicated restart. The procedure was standardized, published, distributed to fighter squadrons. Technique reserved for jet intercepts only. Risk acceptable only when facing otherwise unbeatable threat. Fletcher returned to flight status, November 16th. Hayes called him into the office. "Don't make me regret this, Captain." "I'll try not to, sir." "And Fletcher, next time you want to experiment with something that might kill you, at least tell me first." "Yes, sir." Both men knew Fletcher probably wouldn't follow that order either. Between November 16th and December 31st, 1944, 12 American pilots used Fletcher's technique. 7 Me-262s destroyed using the dead man's drop. 4 more damaged. 2 P-51s lost attempting the technique when engine restarts failed. Kill ratio, 3.5 to 1 in favor of Americans, compared to previous ratio of 0 to 18 against Americans. The technique proved effective despite risks. German intelligence identified the American tactic by December 10th. Issued warning to Me-262 pilots. American fighters feigning engine damage to lure pursuit. Do not close on apparently disabled aircraft. Maintain speed and altitude advantage. German jet pilots became cautious, hesitant, stopped closing for confirmation kills, stopped pursuing damaged-appearing American fighters. Even without shooting down jets, Fletcher's technique succeeded psychologically. German pilots second-guessed their assessments. Is that P-51 really crippled, or is it a trap? Hesitation reduced German effectiveness. Me-262 kill rate against B-17s dropped 43% in December compared to October. Fletcher flew 31 more combat missions between November and April 1945. Used the dead man's drop 3 more times. November 16th, 2nd Me-262 kill. December 3rd, 3rd Me-262 kill. December 19th, 4th Me-262 kill. Fletcher became the leading American ace against German jets. 4 confirmed Me-262 kills, 2 probable. He survived all 94 combat missions. War ended May 8, 1945. Fletcher returned to Ohio in June, married Sarah Collins, his high school sweetheart, returned to farming, never flew again. When reporters asked about the war, Fletcher said little. When pressed about Me-262 kills, he said less. In a 1967 interview, Fletcher's only comment was, "I did what needed doing. Lot of guys did more." The truth Fletcher never told reporters. Every time he cut that engine in combat, he was terrified. Every 30-second glide felt like 30 minutes. Every restart attempt he thought might be his last. But 960 bomber crew came home from that first mission. That number justified the fear, justified the risk, justified breaking every rule. Fletcher received the Distinguished Service Cross in December 1944. Citation: "For extraordinary heroism in developing and executing innovative fighter tactics." The citation didn't mention violated orders, didn't mention court-martial risk, didn't mention gambling his life on unproven technique. Just said, extraordinary heroism. Fletcher kept the medal in a drawer for 40 years, never displayed it. When he died in October 1998, age 79, his family found the medal wrapped in the original citation. They also found a notebook, pages filled with calculations, glide ratios, descent rates, engine restart sequences, the mathematics of survival, the mathematics of innovation, the mathematics of refusing to accept that some problems have no solution. The Fletcher technique never became official doctrine. Too risky, too dependent on pilot skill and enemy psychology. But 7 Me-262s died because one Ohio farm kid refused to accept that jets were unbeatable, refused to watch bombers burn while following orders that didn't work, refused to let mathematics and physics dictate the outcome. Sometimes innovation means breaking rules. Sometimes survival means taking risks others won't take. Sometimes one pilot with a dangerous idea saves 960 lives. Fletcher's P-51D Ohio Ranger survived the war. Now displayed at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The placard describes Fletcher's 4 Me-262 kills. Doesn't mention the dead man's drop. Doesn't mention engine cuts at 22,000 feet. Doesn't mention 30% failure rate. Just says, Captain James Fletcher, Distinguished Service Cross, 4 Jet, victories. Museum visitors walk past every day, never knowing the aircraft hanging above them once fell silent in German skies, never knowing its pilot bet his life that arrogance was predictable, and won that bet 4 times.